quick Dave Ramsey and then we'll get out of here. We'll do a couple minutes of Dave. All right. So we'll just wrap up with this.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So Dave Ramsey, what do we got here? Should landlords feel guilty about raising rent prices? I don't know. This one was sent to us. We'll have to check it out. So.
Oh, someone sent this to us.
Yeah. So the Dave Ramsey game, if you guys have never seen this before, is Lacey and I try. Well, Lacey tries to guess what Dave's going to say, and then we explain to you why it's stupid. And it's never failed. You can send us random clips. It never fails. All right, here we go.
But you know what? I like when they send them to us because then it's sort of a challenge. It's sort of like we get to see it a little bit blindly.
Yeah.
You know?
So we'll check this out. So should landlords feel guilty about raising rent prices? What do you think he's going to say?
Well, I mean, I guess I kind of want to hear the caller first. But
all right.
Before I hear the caller, I'm interested and curious because Dave owns so many rental properties that I can't imagine he would be on the side of anti-rental increase.
Probably not.
But he might kind of be on the side of, thinking that there's a cap to what is reasonable to raise. I'm going to guess he's probably got some sort of value on that, but I'd like to hear what the actual question is, because I can't imagine the caller question is literally, hey, do you think landlords should increase? So I don't know. I want to hear the question.
Well, I think he's going to be on the side of increasing whenever you can, but I think he's going to try to find some way to morally justify it. That's going to be total bullshit. That would be my guess, because that's what he's done in the past every time he gets a question like this.
Today's question comes from Dan in Washington, D.C. I'm a landlord who owns multiple rental properties. Over the past year or two, rent prices have seen a big increase. This is great for a landlord, but not so great for the tenant. I know I need to raise my rental rates to keep up with the increased overhead costs. However, this causes direct hardship to my tenants that have been good tenants for the past few years. As a Christian, this is hard for me. I would feel bad if raising rent caused them to have to move after they've made the house their home. I did not get into real estate to subsidize people's living expenses, but I also didn't get into real estate to displace families either. I love investing in real estate, so I don't see myself exiting this field. So I'd like to hear your advice on how to balance this equation.
It is sweet that you've got a big heart like this, and that's a nice thing. And you're not exiting the landlord field. And so you are going to have to learn to balance your faith with business practices that are not dishonoring to your faith. Treat other people like you would want to be treated. Okay. I lease a building for Ramsey Solutions that is an office warehouse. We're not the owner of it. About 5 miles from where we sit right now, from our buildings that we own. And the lease is coming up for renewal. If the guy raises my rent to market rate, why does that make him a bad Christian? That was a passive-aggressive question. Answer is, it doesn't. Okay,
That's it. See, I told you. Now it's a religious question.
Okay, well, in all fairness, the person that was writing in, identified them in a religion and actually did want that kind of cooked into the crust of the answer. And that's not all that different than what I expected, him to say. I mean, I knew he'd be in favor of the increase, and he didn't say anything about like the sort of price gouging, sort of thing, but he did talk about balance. There are some places where there literally is like the government kind of intervenes on that and says how much year to year you actually can increase. I happen to live in one of those places, where it comes out every year, this is the percentage of increase that is allowable, etc.
Mm-hmm.
To keep people from saying, and suddenly your rent is $500 more expensive,
Right. Right. Oh, okay. Well, here's a good example. Let's see. Okay, this is just Oregon. This is the Oregon State Bar. So let's see what they say. Let me zoom in so it's a little bit clearer. Rent increases. There you go. Landlord tenant law. When can a landlord increase rents? A landlord is not allowed to increase a tenant's rent during the first year of the tenancy. Okay, so there's laws restricting this. Okay, I don't know. I've never done that sort of thing. So after the first year of the tenancy, the landlord is allowed to increase the tenant's rent by delivering to the tenant a written notice at least 90 days before the rent increase will go into effect. Generally, a landlord can raise a tenant's rent only once in a 12-month period. So then it goes through how to give notice. Statewide rent control.
Right. Yep.
The state of Oregon limits how much a landlord can increase a tenant's rent. Every fall, the government releases information on a measure of inflation called the Consumer Price Index, so the CPI, that everybody uses. This inflation measure affects the maximum allowable rent increase for the coming year. In any given year, a landlord can raise a tenant's rent by the lower of the following two limits, 10% or 7% plus CPI. So if CPI is 1%, then you can only raise it 8. But if CPI is 4 or 5%, you can only raise it 10. 10% is still pretty high. Because you're also talking about, right now, we finally have like good wage growth, but wage growth is averaging 4%? And your rent's increasing by 10. So it's a way to gouge people that don't own property. In a bigger sense of the concept. But Dave's talking about it like, well, it's the market. Like it's the market forces, right? Well, what causes the cost to go up? Right? Maybe it's increased cost to you, but you could raise the rent just enough to cover those increased costs and still maintain your profit. Or you could leave the rent where it's at, but then you'd be taking a lower profit, right? So at the end of the day, you're the one deciding to raise the rent.
Right.
So you can't do this magical, like it has nothing to do with you. Your hand is forced. God intervened.
However,
bullshit.
You know what? I am going to a certain degree, agree with the way I interpret something he was saying when he refers to what the market forces are. I feel like part of what he's saying is, you don't, like, if this is your business and, what you are doing for a living is you are landlording for a living, just because you don't want to be doing harm to people, you don't need to be leaving people's rent untouched so that you are giving rent below what the norm is for the area. Like if a normal 1-bedroom is renting for 1,000, you're not obligated to like leave it sitting there at 700 because you keep not raising and keep not raising and keep not raising. I feel like that's where the whole market thing comes into effect, because if landlords don't increase the rent and everyone around them they become the person that's below market. Yes, it would make your place easy to rent out if you had a vacancy, but at the same time, I think the point is, he's saying that people are not obligated to leave it like that.
No, my thing about it though is there's a need base around that. It's like food. It's one of these inelastic sort of things where you have to have shelter, right? Unless you want to live on the street and be homeless, right? So it's a necessity going forward. So it's one of those things where there's also kind of a situation where, let's say I'm renting the apartment and the landlord raises it by 10%. That's the max they can raise it by, right? Well, I have two choices. I can either move or I can eat the 10%. Well, to move is going to cost me money because I'm going to have first month's, last month's. I'm going to have time to find a new place. I'm going to have to then pay to move all my stuff or rent a truck or, whatever. Right. So now that's going to cost extra money. So I'm getting bled either way as the renter. So it's coercive no matter how you spin it, because I'm stuck in a position where you're forcing me to either move and spend money or stay there and spend more money. Right. Now, I could understand, reasonably speaking, we're just talking about on a moral aspect, right? If that's the question, then it's like, okay, my costs went up by 2 or 3%, so I'm going to raise rent 2 or 3% to cover my costs, right? That's something that's reasonable. But if I'm sitting there going, well, yeah, but the guy next to me raised his 10, so I'm going to raise mine 10. Or maybe me and the other apartment owners talk because we're all part of the Chamber of Commerce. And we all know each other. We all get together like little oligarchs and go, well, what are you raising yours by? Well, I'm going to raise mine by 9. Okay, well, let's all agree we're all going to raise by 9. So they're all forced.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm laughing about the idea that you think these are all guys that know each other at the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, quite frankly, they might, but I'm a landlord, and I don't know any of the other people that are landlords anywhere near me.
But you rent one property.
I don't. It's true, and I use a management company, and they send me their recommendations every year, and I pick one of their recommendations and say, yeah, okay, let's do that, and then we do that.
Right.
Yeah.
But one property. This guy owns multiple properties. Dave owns multiple properties. So they do have a bit of a monopoly, which allows them to do that. So when I'm sitting there saying, yeah, they're getting together and talking about it, or they're doing it, it's because Dave has a corner on that market. So if Dave raises at 10, who else are you going to go to? And if the guy next to him is like, well, Dave's raising 10, so I can raise 10. Right? So that's where these housing prices get out of control. And what is the number?
Well, you know what? Speaking of that, I mean, this is, slightly to the side, but that's part of why what you looked up existed in Oregon, because when I first turned my place into a rental property there, those guidelines, those were not rules in Oregon. That didn't exist. And there came a point in time where in the Portland metropolitan area, people were finding themselves renters with suddenly getting a $500 a month rental increase because of just sort of the craziness in the rental market over there at the time.
Right.
That wasn't a thing that happened to my property. The management company I use has always been very consistently keeping the increases about the same. It'd be like $50 this year, $50 this other year. Will stay the same whatever year. But there were people in the area that were getting jacked up by that much, and that was why the local government did jump in and say, okay, hold on, we're going to have a huge crisis on our hands here if we don't do something about this.
Right.
Which is interesting. I live in New York City, and that's something that's existed here for a long time.
Oh, well, here's this. So check this out. Tennessee, where Dave lives, does not have rent control laws limiting the amount that landlords ask for rent. So, wow. So this really puts another spin on it. So Dave could sit there and go, I'm going to raise it 20%. Right. But then what does he say? His whole thing is, well, it's not you gouging them or being evil. It's just the market. But what determines the market? Well, if Dave raises it 20 and Dave's the biggest renter or landowner, then 20 is now the market. That's the standard. So he's creating the market and then saying, well, but it's just the market. Like it's the hand of God or something. That's my point. It's bullshit at the end of the day. It's just him trying to morally justify being a slumlord. That's all it really is.
So, I mean, I gotta say, good job to our viewer, because you definitely have Duncan and I on at least slightly different sides of that. Although I will agree with you in like a smaller market and one that doesn't have any sort of rent control policies at that, it does give one big cheese the opportunity to sort of control the market. So like, especially like in a smaller sort of town, like, yeah, well, maybe is harder to do in like a larger city, but it could be easy to do in small to mid-sized towns if you got like one big person and they kind of end up controlling the market. Then that piece of advice kind of goes,
Well, my argument is that you need stuff like rent control. Otherwise, it does get out of hand, and it becomes monopolistic or oligarchical, and they just start taking advantage because they have you at wit's end. They have you at the point of a gun, right? And that's what's happened in the past, and we've seen that happen before. And it's impoverished a lot of people, and it's part of the reason you have such a divide now between the rich and the poor is because I own all this and I can set the price. So if you don't have a government to come in and regulate that and go, well, no, you can't set it that high, then nothing's stopping me. Right? I would argue, and I would bet you $1 million that if we asked Dave, how do you feel about rent control? Dave would probably be against it. He'd just say, "Oh, but no, you just do it by the market."
Against it because he would not want the government controlling his wallet. Just like he feels that way about Social Security and taxes and anything where the government has their hand in his wallet. He is not a huge fan of.
Yeah, but he's all for socializing his profits. He's all for taking the government insurance on his properties. He's all for the tax breaks on his properties. He's all for all the benefits and the estate tax and all that stuff and the restrictions on estate tax. He's not for estate tax, but barely anything's going to, cost him on estate tax. It's not that much. But that's my point. He's all for socializing his risks and liabilities, but he wants to privatize his profits. That's the bullshit. That's where it's hypocritical. And to sit there and say, well, you're not a bad Christian for doing that. It's like, well, isn't that kind of counter to everything Jesus fucking says in the Bible? Didn't Jesus say, give away all your property? Come with me? So it's,
I don't know, you could write into Dave and ask him about that. Yeah. I don't know.
The other thing I want to do, because it's funny, just because it cracks me up, because I always hear this. So they do the Christians do unto others as you would want done unto you bullshit. That was added centuries later by the Catholic Church. That section of the Bible wasn't in any of the original stuff. And what it is it's actually a ripoff of Confucius, who said it in 500 BC. Right? And Confucius actually said it correctly. Confucius said, do not do unto others as you do not want done unto yourself. Because see, he made it a negative. It's a liberty situation. Because if I do unto others as I'd have done unto me, well, what if I like having my genitals grabbed? Does that mean I should do that to everybody I meet?
I knew that was going to go somewhere weird with you.
Well, it has to, because if I like getting punched in the face, does that mean I should punch everybody in the face? Because I would want to do unto others as I want them to do unto me. That's why it doesn't make sense. It's stupid. The Catholic Church screwed it all up, and then people take it as gospel. It just cracks me up.
Well, on that note.
Well, anyway, that was pretty much our show for today. So, Lacey, where can everybody catch you?
As always, you can catch me at mysensewithsense.com. That is where you'll find articles by me, workshops I do, courses that I teach. If you want information about any of that, or if you want to send us some other clips,
yes,
good job in getting Duncan and I at least sort of in separate corners. Really. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, not really. But...
well, I wasn't 100% in yours, so I don't know. I had my own side, I guess.
I don't know.
Anyway, send us some stuff via email. We always like those, and it's kind of more fun when we can go at it a little bit blindly because neither one of us have to pick it out because you sent it to us.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can email us, and where should they do that, Duncan?
You can email us at gossipfinancead@outlook.com. Also, check us out on Patreon coming up. I'm doing some videos this week. It's a little sparse right now for videos, but I got a bunch of stuff coming up. So this week I'm going to cover GM and their move to hybrids after their horrible stock route for the last 5 years under was there Mary Barra, who's the CEO. I'm going to cover the inflation report for February 13th and how that's going to affect the Fed and how it's sort of affected the market. Plus, I make fun of Larry Kudlow because he's an idiot. and then I'll cover more on the Trump and the Supreme Court case for the disqualification and what's going on with that. So, yeah, check it out. And then we've got some stuff on whether or not to pay off your house early or to save the money and invest it and how you would calculate that and make up that decision. And then I've got some stuff on how to solve credit debt and the different strategies. So So check it out.
All right, so go check that out. And in the meantime, Duncan's going to go polish his sword.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
Yeah.